I'm Ben Decker, CEO of Decker Communications, and I'm excited to introduce you to a recently recorded session of Communicate to Influence in a virtual environment. We recently partnered with Selligent, specifically for Selligent's partners and clients to be more aware, work on communications in a virtual environment. As people are starting to even go back to work, one thing remains certain: virtual communications is not going anywhere. So we need to be as good as possible at it in how we come across and how we influence, whether you're marketing, sales, or engineering. So please enjoy the next 30 plus minutes with one of our senior consultants, Amelia McCormick.
As we shift gears to this next 30-minute session, this is about you. How do you communicate to influence in this new virtual environment, in this remote experience where we are trying to find out how we demonstrate connection, how we demonstrate credibility? And we're going to kick off today with a quote. This is from Sydney Harris, a former Chicago Tribune reporter, who said, "The two words information and communication are often used interchangeably, but they signify quite different things. Information is giving out, communication is getting through." And that's your goal. When we think about the role of events, the role of field marketing, the role that each of you play, it's all about connection. It's all about emotion. And it's not about informing. It's about getting through, communicating to influence and shift how people are thinking and acting, whether it's your internal stakeholders, your CMO or your leadership team, whether it's your external partners trying to get clients and customers bought into an event or an experience. Whatever the communication situation may be, we're trying to communicate to get through. So as we think about today, it's all about the experience that you create, and you are always creating an experience. You have total control over whether your audience feels engaged and energized or kind of checked out and bored. That wasn't the best use of my time. You have total control whether they're leaning in or kind of leaning out. And when we think about the total communication experience that you're creating, I like to think of it sort of as like a GPS. So I live in Asheville, North Carolina. It's super hilly here. It's not a grid. It's the opposite of a grid. And so when we first moved here, I needed my GPS to get absolutely everywhere. And the best thing about a GPS is you say exactly what your destination is, and it plots turn-by-turn directions to help you get there. The problem when it comes to communication, especially when we're trying to influence, is that we're not often really clear about our final destination, our final goal, our final outcome. And then we're sort of surprised when we don't have turn-by-turn navigational instructions to get us there. Now, you are all masters of creating experiences for others. But when we think about the communication experience that you're creating for others, we have to be super intentional about the goal, the outcome, what we're driving to, what we're trying to accomplish. So I want to just orient you to a book and a resource, Communicate to Influence by Ben and Kelly Decker. The tool I'm going to show you comes from their book specifically, and it's called The Communicator's Roadmap. Now, this is a foundation for thinking about communication experiences. This has not changed in the virtual environment, but it gives us sort of a grounding point for today. So when we think about a roadmap for communication and being really intentional, there's two axes at play. The horizontal axis is all around content. There's self-centered content and audience-centered content. Self-centered doesn't mean that you're self-centered, but it means your content is all about you, your product, your services, your company. It's a me, me, me kind of message versus being all about you, my stakeholders, my partners, my leadership, my customers and clients. And on the vertical axis, we have emotional connection. And where we have high emotional connection, we have high trust, high rapport, high credibility, high believability, high authenticity, all the things we're looking for in the connections that we create with our clients, our customers, and with our teams. And where these intersect, we have some quadrants. So in the lower left-hand corner, where you have self-centered content and low emotional connection, you're just informing. This is where college professors hang out. This is where a lot of financial data reporting is. And this is also status update meetings, kind of day-to-day informational downloads. There's a time and a place for that. But I'm going to come back to that in a moment, because if you're not trying to just inform, you're usually trying to get somewhere else. The upper left-hand corner is for high emotional connection, but self-centered content. And this is business connections. This is small talk. There's a time and a place for entertaining communication where the takeaway is, ooh, I like this, or I like this brand. I like this experience. I like this person. But we're not really influencing anyone in this quadrant. In the bottom right, we have direct. This is what you need to do. So it is about influence. It is about our listeners, but the emotional connection isn't really there. And where we actually want to aspire to be is in the inspire quadrant. And where we have inspiration, we also have influence. But the shift is that our audience is doing something because they want to, not just because they have to, like down and direct. Now, again, the key here is intention. So if your goal is to influence and inspire, but all you did was inform your audience, you miss an opportunity. If your goal is to influence and inspire and get people emotionally engaged, but all you did was direct them, you missed an opportunity. So great communicators are really intentional about where on this roadmap they're plotting a course. But along the way, at every point in the communication journey, you're pulling on two levers: how you're creating emotional connection and how you're creating audience-centered content. So in any in-person communication experience where we can see people, we can hear them, and we can hear the content, there are 3 V's at play. The verbal is the content itself, the words coming out of my mouth. The vocal is the sound, the volume, the projection, the tone of my voice. The visual is what you see of me. And in a video experience, that definitely is at play, as well as it is in person. Each of these makes up a percentage of the total communication experience you create. Now, here's the key. Which of these do you think has the highest weight, the highest percentage attributed to it? Do you think it's the verbal, the content, the vocal, which is what you hear from me, or the visual experience you're getting from the speaker? When it counts in communicating, here are the real numbers. This is a study out of UCLA by a man named Albert Moravian, who also wrote the book Silent Messages. And what he found is in an in-person communication situation, which this also counts, again, because you can see me while I'm speaking, we are ultimately going to believe what we see and what we hear before we believe the words themselves. Now, that's in an inconsistent communication situation. So, for example, if what I'm saying doesn't match the words that I'm coming out of my mouth and it doesn't come across in the consistent way, we believe what we see and what we hear first. And we've all seen this. We've had this inconsistent experience when we're listening to someone or seeing someone. We see them talking about how excited they are to be part of Event Geeks Reboot 2020. And communication is incredibly important when it comes to your internal influence. You do not believe that. That is brutal to have to listen to that inconsistent experience where you're believing what we see and what we hear first. So this has profound implications for our day-to-day communication situations. We have to be aware of that total experience, both how we come across and the content as well. Seeing helps believing is a big part of this too. And in this remote environment, we do have the opportunity to still connect. We do have the opportunity to still influence others. Part of that is showing up and choosing to be on video over just audio. This creates a very different experience than if you were just happening to listen to my voice while I was talking about the slides. This creates a very, very different experience for our listeners, for our clients, our partners, our stakeholders. You don't want to lose that opportunity for connection. But what are you broadcasting? Because just take a moment and think about, if you were to frame up right now on video, what would the experience be? Hopefully it's not the backlit upper right. Hopefully it's not the fish getting a little bit too close to the camera. You do have to take a moment to think about framing up that experience. And a few just simple tips as you think about the experience you're creating on video, whether it be internally or externally. Make sure that that camera is nice and level with your eyes. Make it feel like you're across the table from someone, just like you are in that in-person experience. Move the camera back, move the laptop back if you can, to kind of create a little bit more of an open frame rather than one that's really, really close to the camera itself. Keep a clean background. Zoom backgrounds can help with that, but try to not have it be too cluttered. We're always kind of looking around at what's in the background, and make sure that the lighting is pointed towards you, not behind you. And don't forget to smile. Never a bad thing. So think about that. What is the experience that you're creating just from what someone sees in that viewfinder on camera? And then when we think about the overall experience, this is what we were experiencing in person in our offices a month ago. So we were watching presentations, we were having meetings seated and standing, and this is on a loop. You can't hear what these speakers are saying, but you're already starting to gravitate toward one of them. You're seeing one of them as more connected, more credible, overall. One of them is demonstrating more confidence, and most likely you're gravitating to the young lady on the right. And that is how we're wired. We're looking at the experience and looking for a consistent one that shows connection and credibility. Now, what's changed in this virtual environment is that that has shrunk to this. So now we have to demonstrate connection and credibility in a much smaller view and with a much smaller viewfinder. So I just want to give you a few key things to think about when it comes to you, how you come across, what people see and hear of you in this virtual environment. And this is how we boost emotional connection through our delivery skills, how we get out of low and up to high rapport, high credibility. There are 4 key remote behaviors of trust, and they really fall into 2 key buckets: connection and credibility. How do we demonstrate connection? How do we demonstrate credibility overall? So from a connection perspective, it's all about committing to connection through eye communication. And that means talking to your audience and not at them. Now, to do that in this remote environment means looking at your camera, not at your picture. So if I look down here at my picture, it's only about a 3-inch difference, but this feels really, really different to you than this. This is me reaching out, connecting, and talking to you. And if I look over here at Courtney's lovely picture, if I look at some of the other panelist pictures in the corner, that connection even is lessened by how much more distance I'm creating versus talking to our camera. This is a really simple thing that you can do to create more connection overall. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do this all the time. It's an 80-20 rule is what we say at Decker. So about 80% of the time, try to connect and talk to your audience by looking at the camera specifically. And then 20% of the time, you're gonna look at the slides, you're gonna look at the information that's being presented, you're gonna read the room, check in on your gallery view, make sure you can see everybody. But where you can provide that opportunity for connection, do it. Again, this is all about connection in this event. Now, from a facial expression perspective, this is another huge part of connection, having that open listening expression as well as speaking expression, showing how you feel, demonstrating curiosity, demonstrating interest. Sometimes if we take a look at ourselves on video, our listening expression can be a little bit more closed off, a little bit more discerning, but it also doesn't feel very open and very welcoming. So how can we make sure that we're showing interest, showing care, demonstrating warmth and connection as well through our facial expression? Now, that doesn't mean you should be smiling all the time, but it does mean that you need to be aware of the experience you're creating in that consistent experience too. Now, from a credibility perspective, we have 2 things at play: the voice and the pause. When it comes to the voice, this is how you're getting energy in a lot of ways through this experience, is through my vocal variety, a variance in volume and pitch and pacing. And if I was to take the video away, all you'd get from me is my voice. So it's critical that you be aware of how you're demonstrating credibility and energy and keeping people tuned in with that nice vocal variety as well. And then finally, the pause is about eliminating filler words, non-words. Words like like, these things that can take away from our overall communication experience. So these are just a few things to keep in mind. Again, thinking about connection and credibility with 4 main buckets. But take a look as you're on these Zoom calls, as you're having conversations internally as well as externally. What's working? What experiences are other people who are part of your organizations making? And what do you want to pick up on as best practices as well? The key here is to get feedback. We tend to have a set of habits. We assume that we're creating one experience, but in reality, we might be creating another. So one of the simplest things you can do is to take your smartphone, which I know is not too far away right now, take your smartphone and audio record yourself. Use Voice Memo or another app and just get a sense for the experience you do create when it's audio only. How is that vocal energy? Would you be able to keep someone tuned in? Does this person, try to make it as objective as possible, does this person sound and feel credible? And are there any filler words getting in the way? And then you also have the opportunity, especially since so many of our video recordings are now recorded and shared later, get a sense for the experience you create in this new remote environment. How do you come across visually? Where could you work on connection? How are you thinking about framing this up a little bit differently? So the key is get some feedback and then commit to 1 or 2 specific behaviors that you want to shift in the next 30 days? What's one behavior that you can get some feedback on from a peer, a trusted partner, your manager, a leader, and then start to work toward as well? So as we think about this experience that we're creating, that we're from a delivery perspective, we can still demonstrate connection and credibility. It just feels a little bit different in this new environment. But commit to getting feedback on at least one behavior this week. Now, for the second half of today, we're going to shift our thinking around content, moving from self-centered to audience-centered content, which really means that our content is about our listeners. It's not about us and our value proposition. It's about you as my audience and what you need. And I love this quote from Chris Anderson, who leads TED. What would happen if you wanted to persuade people to come along with you on a journey? You've got to start where they are and give them a reason to come with you. And that's our task. As we communicate to influence, we have to start where our listeners are. And again, whether this is a presenter who's coming in to be part of an experience, whether this is a specific customer or client that you want to come in and be part of a new program, whether it's your internal CMO or leadership team or your manager who you're trying to get buy-in around a new project, whatever it may be, you've got to start where they are. And unfortunately, our tendency isn't to do that. It's to start where we are, what we know, instead of necessarily taking into account their position, their perceptions, their opinions, and where they might be. So as we think about taking our listeners on a journey, think about a message that you need to deliver in the next week. Again, it may be internal, it may be external, but what's an upcoming message that you need to deliver where you're trying to influence, you're trying to gain buy-in, you're trying to make a recommendation, shift a mindset, get someone to move the needle in a different direction overall, or just sign off on a new idea, a new program to replace something that's been lost. So have that in the back of your mind as we go through this project. Now, the key here, as we've shifted to this virtual environment, we think about our customers, our clients, they're swirling in the same complexities of uncertainty and worry and fear that we are. Their industries are just as disrupted as yours. And so it's more critical than ever that we hone in, we cut through that clutter with focus and total clarity in the pitches that we make and the messages that we develop. And to do that, it's as simple as asking yourself 4 key questions. So think about that upcoming communications situation in the back of your mind and answer these questions as a starting point for honing a focused, listener-based message. First and foremost, who are you talking to? And not just knocking off CMO or my business SVP that I'm trying to get to be part of this program, but who are you talking to and where are they now? What are their perceptions? What are they wrestling with? What are they dealing with that you can support them in? How can you help them? What objections or challenges might they bring up? So really taking a moment to think about some true analysis. And we know this as marketing people, this is important. We always want to consider our listener, but really meeting them where they are in this process and in this message, wherever they may be on the journey toward a program, an experience, or an event. And then once you've done that listener analysis, really honing in on the core of the message. What's the one thing you want them to take away? What's the one thing you want them to understand differently? What's the one thing you want them to shift in how they're thinking or acting? But ultimately, if you were to take your whole message and boil it down with total focus and clarity to one core lead of the story, what would it be? That's hard. That's very difficult to do. But if you've done that listener analysis and if you think about meeting them where they are, what's the one thing you want them to take away? What should they do as a result? What's that next step they need to take or the ultimate step? And then finally, what's in it for them? Why should they care? And when we think about our listeners, it's so critical, again, that we get to that one thing and the why. When we think about influencing our leadership, I want to know as a CMO, I want to know the why right away. So as we think about these questions, this is a baseline for any influential message, whether it's turning into a pitch deck, whether it's turning into an email or a conversation. If you start here, then you can start to brainstorm the right supporting detail, the right supporting metrics, the right supporting information to back this message up. But it all starts with these questions. And just to give you an example, just a program pitch example, pretty generic, but something that you're all doing and interacting with on a regular basis. So let's say your listener is a CMO. So you've got leadership, skeptical, focused on value and return on investment, definitely data-driven, looking for new opportunities, but curious. So this is a current situation for many of you where you're trying to pitch a potential new program, a new solution to a CMO. And so from there, honing in on what's the one thing. And in this example, we must show value to prove our position. So one example of what the one thing might be, the takeaway for that CMO from that meeting. We have to show value. We have to prove our position in the marketplace, in the industry, whatever it may be. From there, it's also about what the next steps are. This week, our top 2 next steps might be X and Y. Now, this could also be a sign, seal, and deliver. Let's commit to moving forward on this in Q3. There's a variety of different action steps you could come up with here. But in this specific example, what are our next 2 specific steps we need to take as a team? And then the benefits, and where you can make these as listener specific as possible. We anticipate getting 3 meetings, generating 10% in pipeline. Those are really specific benefits and data-driven, which is what a CMO typically is going to be really caring about. Show me the metrics, me the value, help me understand why this is so, so important and so, so critical. Now, one final concept for you all today. Logic makes you think, emotion makes you act. And as we shift towards creating an experience, we have high emotional connection through delivery. We have audience-centered content. We have to also make our messages stick. And to do that, we talk about SHARP tools at Decker. SHARP tools are just an acronym for stories, humor, analogies, references and quotes, and pictures and visuals. These are tools for memorability. These are tools for sticky messages that resonate. And we're trying to connect emotion with the logical, data, metric-driven messages that we're putting together. How do we get our audience to step in and see it and feel it? And I'll give you a couple examples of ones that we've seen in our business sphere. One is this Forbes 2008 quote, which is still very relevant today. Today's recession is an opportunity. Marathoners and Tour de France racers will tell you that a race's hardest parts, the uphill stages, are where the leads changes hands. That's where we are. And that's why it's more critical than ever that we put all of our effort into developing as many virtual experiences for our customers as we possibly can, or whatever that lead of the story might be. So you have a quote tied with a really arresting visual. You have a SHARP that's helping you set up that lead of the story, helping you set up a point or a key idea later as part of a presentation. Another example is the city of Baltimore. And this was an IT developer that we worked with for a large tech company. And he came up with the story of Baltimore as a lead-in to his point of view, which was around technical standards. And he said the city of Baltimore burned to the ground in 1904 and it didn't have to happen. They had all the resources. They brought in surrounding communities and resources and manpower and materials and people and everything they needed to fight the fire in the city center. And unfortunately, they didn't have access to water because the hoses they had brought from the outside communities didn't fit the hydrants at the city center, and the city burned. And it was simply a lack of standards. If we don't adopt internal technical standards, we could suffer greatly, just like Baltimore. Now, that's a very dramatic analogy, but you can see the power of how that story sets up the need and the motivation to drive toward greater technical standards. So SHARPs are, again, a collection of tools and ways of thinking about making your message stick. Again, the goal with this 30 minutes was very much to shift your thinking around creating a different experience, one of inspiration and one of influence, as we shift up and to the right with high emotional connection and audience-centered content. And there were a lot of tools presented today, but the key is to not miss opportunities. Planting intentionally that destination that you're looking for any communication experience, no matter what that touch point might be. And the next steps, I challenge each of you to get feedback on behavior, especially in this new virtual experience. Use the Cornerstones framework to make your next message have impact, and use SHARP tools to make your message stick.